Life and Death in the City at the Center of the World, Berlin.
Now here we go. Firstly, welcome to this review of the book Life and Death in the City at the Center of the World, Berlin. And today I'm just going to go ahead and talk mainly about why you should read it, like the France book. It's like the France book, except instead of France, we are now in Germany, and instead of an actual entire country and thousands of years of history, we're only focusing on the 20th and the current 21st centuries, 20th to 21st centuries in Berlin. And so then, of course, there are so many other things that we can go ahead and need to talk about. But here's the thing. What we do next is kind of depends on history. Berlin has a rich history, and as someone once put it, this thing keeps turning off, and as someone put it, every city has a history. Like, sure, every city needs a history. But Berlin has literally too much. Repeat after me, too much. But then again, in the glory days of old Berlin, according to the survivors, there's a lot that we can go ahead and say about that as well, too. Berlin has one of its own glory days, and we've had our own days as well, too. We've had days of glory, we've had days of downfall. In the olden days of glorious Berlin, we get days where Berlin basically was one of the most important cities in the world, as well as one of the most fascinating ones as well, too. Berlin and Germany were basically the ones who can go ahead and did things. They were also part of the Industrial Revolution, since Germany was part of it. And that's great. And nowadays is also a place where we go ahead and make cars. Well, that would have been true years ago, but now I'm not so sure because Tesla exists. But how did Berlin actually got one of its least greatest reputations it has today? Mainly because Berlin goes ahead and doesn't really rebuild.
Let's say a creeper goes and blows up your home. Kablam! Your house is destroyed. You have two options. Well, actually, kind of three. We'll see about the third one later on. You go ahead and quit the world, and you'll possibly delete it forever. Option number 2, you rebuild, but you probably have less building materials, so it doesn't really look as good. And option number 3, you leave everything the way it was. And maybe just go ahead and build a new house somewhere nearby. The Berliners rebuilt, but they left some scars behind. It's like when your house was blown up in Minecraft, and then suddenly you go ahead and rebuild it, but you don't rebuild it the way it was before. You go ahead and leave some things differently, so it's a completely different house.
We go and see Berlin's history whether we want to or not. Every time we go ahead and take a look at a Berlin building, go ahead and see what it was like, because most Berlin buildings are actually kind of reconstructed versions of some other buildings as well, too. As well as other sites, such as some hospitals that were Jewish. We will understand when World War II comes in. They were left in rubbles, but no one actually bothered to clean them up, or even bothered to rebuild. How did all this happen exactly? Well, let's start off with World War I. This is not one of the most biggest causes, but then again, Germany did lose this war. And so I guess we just go ahead and see what is happening there. So World War II was a terrible time for Germany because Germany lost the entire war, even though they had massive propaganda and stuff. And so once the Germans lost the war, Berlin basically came back, basically somehow bounced back from the terrible things that happened during it, and everyone started discoing and partying again. In fact, in the 1920s, Berlin was considered to be one of the hottest tourist destinations, of all time, if you were rich enough to even go to Berlin, that is. And then, of course, we have other things to really talk about. After its bounce back, then of course the entire world got affected by the stock market crisis, the Wall Street crash, I believe it's called. I'm just going to call it Wall Street crash, the WSC. And then that's when people started actually getting pissed off, and, well, a lot of people actually needed a new government, and they blamed the old government. So what did the government do? They basically changed their own things. And then
here comes a guy who's German, is very angry at the current government, and has a very funny mustache. You know who I'm talking about? If you don't, his name is Hitler. And he ran for presidency of Germany. And he got completely obliterated by his opponent, who also wanted the presidency. By the way, he won. So Hitler tried to be chancellor, And, well, the president was like, okay. Then somehow Hitler gained entire control of the entire party of Germany, made Germany Nazis, and promptly declared World War II. In the beginning, Nazis had trouble with votes, but gradually that changed, and then Hitler's entire cabinet was, well, Nazified, and so World War II happened.
Obviously, this started a terrible time for Berliners, and eventually the Berliners lost the war. Even though at the beginning they seemed to be winning. In fact, patriotism was the highest thing. But then I think the main focus turn that actually went ahead and changed this turn was the fact that the Nazis thought the Jewish were terrible, were considered inhumane. They considered the Jewish inhumane, and so that went ahead and affected their that affected their days. What I mean by that is that the Nazis went ahead and started trying to make scapegoats for all the bad things that have been happening to Germany. Instead of blaming the previous presidency, which technically Hitler was a part of, Hitler basically blamed the Jews. So the Jews got backlash. Luckily, a lot of the Jews were able to. A lot of the Jews that were able to escape before the war survived, but the ones who decided not to get out of there, well, they were stuck there for the rest of their life. They were sent in either into concentration camps to die, or somehow survive the entirety of the war, or be like Anne Frank, go into hiding and write a diary that would become one of the most famous books in the entire world. And there are a lot of things that I could go ahead and contribute to this as well too. This is not supposed to be a summary video, but I already just summarized a lot of the information. After World War II and after Hitler's apparent suicide, he's obviously dead by now. He couldn't be over 100 years old. Well, at least soon anyway. Actually, he has to be 100 years old if he's supposed to be alive by now. The thing is, this is not supposed to be a summary video. I'm here to go ahead and convince you why you should read this darn book. Berlin, Life and Death in the City at the Center of the World. Berlin, it's an interesting book because it goes ahead. And like the France book, you get a feel for the city itself too. You feel the scars, you feel all the things that Berlin has gone through. But once you've read this book, there's not much that can change your mind from going ahead and reading it again and again and again. I actually only read it once, but I don't really want to read it again. And next thing that you know is that you learn about Berlin. You also learn about its history, and you learn about how many scars it has gone through, how many things that it has gone through. And so, in the end, you just have to get a feel for it. You have to understand it. And you just have to go ahead and learn it. In fact, all the books I've read behind me, I haven't read all of them. You have to go ahead and I understand their ideas. Every story is supposed to go ahead and have a meaning. For this, it's supposed to tell us all the things that Berlin has gone through, all the scars they have gone through, all the bad things that have happened to them. And unfortunately, might happen to them again. But now that the entire world has changed, for better or worse, is a totally different argument. I think you should read this book mainly because you actually understand the life and death in the city at the center of the world. Chic, yeah? So I hope to see you guys soon, and so until next time, Shanana, peace. Buy this book. Bye-bye!
Ba-bum, 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 ba-bum.